Good evening. Welcome to the 5th night of Frights. I'm Melissa Mackey, and I'm here from Los Alamos County Library System to share one of my favorite folk tales, the story of Tailybone. Our story starts with me slipping into my Texas accent, and then we're going to go way, way back in the hills. Back in the hills several states over in Appalachia. Way back in the hills, there was an old man named Jake, and he lived alone in a small one-room cabin with his dogs. And Jake was a hunter, and he went out every day to see if he could find something to feed himself and the dogs. Occasionally they would pick some herbs or some leafy greens or maybe grow some vegetables, but mostly they were meat eaters. So one cold October evening, Jake came home with nothing. He and the dogs had to go to bed hungry. Jake walked over to his fireplace and he kind of tidied things up, banked the coals so it would be a little warm in the room at night. And then he pulled his quilt up over himself in his bed and he started to try to go to sleep. He could hear the dogs around him licking their paws and trying to settle in for the night. He could hear a woofle and a snuffle from the dogs every once in a while. And then they settled in. Just as Jake was about to fall asleep, he looked over and he saw two red eyes watching him from beside the fireplace. Oh my God, what is that? Jake said softly to himself. Then he sat up a little straighter in bed. He said, "Who's there?" There was no answer. Jake reached down beside the bed and he pulled up his handy little hatchet, and he knew he was going to jump out of that bed and get that thing. It looked like it had a lot of meat on it. Now that his eyes adjusted to the dark, he could see that it had hair on its face, long claws, some scales, some feathers, and a very, very long tail. He readied himself, and then he jumped up out of the bed, across the room so fast. But the thing was already on the move, and it went out through a hole in the wall. Jake brought that hatchet down anyway, and on top of his floor was just one long furry tail. Oof. The creature was gone, but left that tail, and Jake picked it up and he looked at it and he thought, and he skinned it, and sure enough, there was plenty of meat on that tail. So he got out some firewood and he made that fire burn brighter and brighter, got a pot of water, and he dropped the entire tail right in that pot. Started to cook it. Oh, he found a few potatoes and carrots that he dropped in. Oh, he was going to have some stew and he was going to share it with his dogs. Now the dogs had slept through the whole thing, which was a little unusual, but that's how dogs do sometimes. So Jake cooked himself up a pot of stew, and then he got himself a spoon and a fork, and he started eating. Every once in a while he'd throw a bite and the three dogs would share it out by themselves. He ate with his dogs the entire pot of stew. Oh, so much better he felt. He wasn't hungry anymore. He was going to get a good night's sleep, and so he stretched, and then he went to lie down in his bed. And the dogs got all settled in, and Jake got all settled in. Oh, he thought, wait a second. And he got back up out of bed, and he went over and he shoved some rags and sticks in that hole where the thing had gone out. He didn't want it to come back. Now he's relaxed. And he's in bed, and he said, uh-oh. His stomach rumbled. Jake didn't feel so good. Oh, I must have eaten too much. I ate too much. It happens sometimes when we're too hungry. He rolled over and he tried to settle into sleep. Relaxed. And then he heard a voice in the dark. Tailybone, Tailybone, I want my Tailybone. Who's there? Jake couldn't feel anybody in the room. He said to his dogs, Eno, Ano, come to Go Calico, you get that thing. And he opened the door, and the dogs lit out into the darkness, racing and barking, full heads off. And they went off, and they came back, and they didn't catch anything. But Jake knew it was gone. He settled back in to go to sleep. There he was, just about to drift off, and he heard a voice just a little louder. Tailybone, Tailybone, I want my Tailybone. Oh, Jake shivered as he lay in bed, but he didn't move. Tailybone, Tailybone, I want my Tailybone. Who is that? Said Jake. No answer. He said to his dogs, Eno, Ano, come to Go Calico, you get that thing. And he opened the door, and the dogs once again lit out into the darkness, barking and howling. This time it took them quite a bit longer, but eventually they came back. They didn't have anything that they'd caught. They were out of breath. They lay down. Jake lay down again. Sure, it was gone this time. Jake's just about to fall asleep, and you know what he heard? You do. Closer. Tailybone, Tailybone, I want my Tailybone. I don't got your Tailybone, said Jake. Tailybone, Tailybone, I want my Tailybone. Jake said, I can't give it back. I done ate it. And the voice said, then I'm going to come get it. And Jake yelled as loud as he could. He said to his dogs, Eno, Ano, come to Go Calico, you get that thing. And he opened the door. It went out the door, whatever it was. The dogs went out the door, and they lit off into the darkness, and he heard, oh, 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 and he heard barking, and then it disappeared. It disappeared. No more sound. But this time, the dogs didn't come back. Well, Jake said to himself, they're going to come back in the morning. So he settled back into sleep. And just as he was about to fall completely asleep, he heard right by his ear, Tailybone, Tailybone, I'm gonna get my Tailybone. A couple of months later, heading toward Christmas, heading toward the winter holidays, heading towards the dark, dark, short nights of the year, somebody down in the village noticed they hadn't seen Jake for a while. They went on up to his cabin. No Jake, no dogs, just a bed, a cold fire, an empty pot, and a big hole in the wall by the fireplace. Folks around that part of the country say, if you're out late on an October night, sometimes in the forest you're going to hear, Tailybone, Tailybone, I want my Tailybone. Tailybone, Tailybone, I got my Tailybone. And that's the story of Tailybone. I learned that listening to the storyteller David Holt, and it has given me a lot of pleasure over the years to share it with other people. Thanks for coming to 5 Nights of Fright.